Okay. So, as part of the summit, Healing Ourselves, Healing Our World, I am so honored to have you with us today, Melanie. And let me just give a little bit of your background. Melanie Reinhart is a patron of the Faculty of Astrological Studies and a prize-winning holder of their diploma from 1979. She's also trained with Jeffrey Cornelius and Deborah Holding, and astrology has been central to her life since 1959, and she's been a professional astrologer since 1975, writing, doing consultations, and teaching internationally. She's also the author of a number of books, including Chiron and the Healing Journey, Saturn, Chiron, and the Centaurs, and Incarnation. And she has a special interest in contemplative experience, both as a healing process and also as a learning modality. And I'm so honored to have you be a part of this summit and to have this chance to talk today. As I was saying to you before we started, your work has had a profound impact on my life and on my professional work as an astrologer. So I'm really glad to be able to talk today and want to focus in depth on your work. Your work is really, from my perspective, the profound original work in helping us understand Chiron and the centaurs.
Well, thank you so much for this invitation to talk. And we were already well into conversation before we even got going on the formal bit here. So I'm really looking forward to that. And thank you for putting the summit together. It's a very, it's a hot topic.
Yes, for these times.
Indeed.
So you were starting to talk about this before the interview, but say more about how you got involved in starting to study Chiron and the centaurs.
Yeah, well, I'd had in my childhood and teens, I had a lot of doings with injury and illness and all that. And I was interested in mythology as well. So I already knew about Chiron. And I somewhere had some sense of what this archetype of the wounded healer meant, because I had done some reading about that, albeit limited. And I had also worked with a healer from a very young age for a few years, a remarkable woman in Zimbabwe. And she was a full trance medium and a healer, amazing high quality. And I apprenticed with her for a few years. So I was already familiar with the whole notion of a world of healing energies, and that was often quite different from the view of medical science or, ordinary doctors and so on and so forth. And so I had help from this woman and also from what she had taught me with the various physical afflictions that I got. So that was already part of my life. So I was very intrigued when this new object was found, and especially as it was named immediately and the name stuck. That's quite unusual with new objects. So that was 1977, and the first ephemeris was out within about 6 months, which is amazing. I believe it took something like 30 years or something before the ephemerises of Pluto were out and, having been tested and all that. But anyway, so obviously the first thing I did was look up where it was in my chart. And I saw that it was in quite I was going to say a prominent place. That's not quite the right word. It just visually stuck out in my first house and opposite my sun, very close opposition. And because it sort of looked as if it was like sticking out, I thought, oh, well, that should be easy to explore or track. I then noticed that by transit, Chiron was shortly about to start making conjunctions with every single one of my personal planets.
Wow.
So I casually thought, well, wow, you know, if this is going to be meaningful for me, I should have like a ringside seat on some stuff happening, which must be about that, you know, because you can embroider all kinds of things onto what something might mean, you know, but you can't fake transits.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And wow, little did I realize what I was in for during that period of time. And basically, fortunately, I was in a Jungian analysis that was really helpful. I was born in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe, well, in Rhodesia as it was, and it became Zimbabwe in 1980. And my father died shortly after the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction, just in early 1983. And so my going back for the funeral and all that was the first time I'd seen the new Zimbabwe. And it was really opening up in all kinds of ways. And I also started learning consciously about some of the African traditions, which of course I'd grown up surrounded by, but I didn't have any conscious knowledge of them really, because it was almost impossible to find anything written. You know, I knew a little by talking to people, but just tiny bits. And after that, I got really ill. And a whole cascade of internal experiences began. And, you know, I'm sure any normal person would have probably gone to the doctor and got medication, or, you know, maybe even got a diagnosis of some kind. And I just had an instinct that was completely the wrong way for me to go. And I did have the help from the analysis. And it seemed as if I was like following the thread of Chiron. That's all I can say, because the very day that I got ill with pneumonia, it was the day that Chiron went into Gemini, which rules the lungs. The day. And of course I was aware of that. And it seemed like, yeah, it was like a thread which just began to unroll and unroll as my own transits unfolded. So I'd already been interested in Chiron. I was sufficiently interested to always calculate it by hand, because this was a long time before computers or internet or anything, and just put it into the charts of the clients I was seeing. And I don't know, it never said anything because I had no idea what to say. But I just collected up notes and notes, you know, when I thought I could see, maybe it's, yeah, maybe that's connected. And then when I began to look at the transits, like the ones I was having, then it really started to come to life. And I just carried on collecting notes and so forth. And then eventually, it was about 1986, that my dear friend, Howard Susportus, who has Chiron on the midheaven in Scorpio, and so he was interested too, and we used to talk a bit about Chiron sometimes. And then through him, I got literally an invitation to write a book about Chiron, and I was flabbergasted. I had never thought of writing a book. And Howard, he was so funny. He said about this project, he'd been given the project by his publishers of scouting for new titles and new authors. And he knew I'd been, you know, boxes and boxes of research material already. And so he said, you know, how about writing a book on Chiron? What, you know? And he said, well, just write us 100 words. Oh, that's easy, 100 words. And next week he came back, he said, okay, they like that. And now we want 500. Okay, 500. It's not so hard, 500. The next thing was, now we need a chapter structure. I said, how do you do a chapter structure without a book? And bless him, he was an Aries with his sun on my North Node in the 6th house.
So supporting you in being on your path.
A little shove there. I said, oh, just do it. airy style. So I still remember this. I sat down at the computer and I said, okay, if there was a book on Chiron that I really wanted to read, what would it have in it? That was easy. So it was part 1, part 2, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, I then landed a contract and then I had to write the book. And apart from one minor change, that ended up the actual chapter structure. It was uncanny, and there were various delays and weird things that happened. But
I love how you really went from your own deep experience of it to then writing about it. You really had your own, in essence, shamanic initiation and awakening with Chiron.
Well, listen, thank you for using that phrase, because I would hesitate, because I wouldn't want to be like, laying claims to anything, but that truly is how it felt. And I was in that process almost pretty much until the time that Chiron was published. And then I thought, okay, now it's all done. But it actually wasn't. There was a whole trail of experiences which followed even on from that for a few years. But the main bulk of it occurred all during the 1980s. And that is what it felt like. And, there I was kind of writing this book. And I would sometimes wake up in the night in horror. And the nightmare was, oh my God, I would have spent like 10 years working on this book, or doing a research, and then, intensive writing. And so on. I would have spent all this time, all this energy on writing a book that nobody's going to read, and they're all going to think I'm mad. This was the nightmare, And on some really deep level, I just knew I just had to keep going. That was all, And there are still people out there who do think I'm mad, but I'm not really bothered.
Well, it really is an extraordinary book. And part of what I love in the book is your understanding of that liminal nature of Chiron and the centaurs, that they really are the ones that move between the worlds and help us move between the worlds.
Exactly. And I think really, well, in a way, I was writing from that space, because that was where I was sort of abruptly taken after being ill, And it did seem very clear to me. It was like Chiron really was some kind of light that I was following. Not a light like, a very bright torch or the sun or something like that. It was more like a dim light where I couldn't really see things clearly. And so I had to go in first with my feelings and my intuition and my senses and all that kind of much more indistinct stuff, and then sort of add on the more intellectual stuff afterwards, That was really how it came to me.
Which feels to me like it's so honoring of the nature of Chiron, because you talk so powerfully in your writing about how Chiron guides us into the underworld, into what is in the unconscious.
Yeah.
Not only what wounds we carry that may be buried within our psyches, but I love how you weave in how it holds our prenatal wounds, our ancestral wounds, all those issues that are hidden in the darkness.
I almost see that. It's almost like a lamination of different levels of our reality, which you can look at probably even genetically. I'm not a scientist, but from the little I've read, there is a story there whereby we carry not just our own history,
yes,
our own family and ancestral history in our genes. If you really want to push that metaphor, that we embody the whole of creation. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, more and more research is coming out that sits very nicely in that model. for example, all the excitement about the microbiome in the gut and how important is our whole flora of different microbes, even viruses, there's loads of them. And, and bacteria and what some people call the smalls, the whole little kingdom of little creatures that are also part of literally of our physical being, And so, there's the human kingdom, of course, the animal kingdom, that includes the fish and the birds. And then there's the earth and the stones and the rocks and the funguses and the microbes. And it goes down and down and down. And it also goes back and back in time with all of the different ways that it's evolved. So, this is a kind of a worldview that maybe back when I was writing the book sounded a bit fantastical, phantasmagorical and so on. But more and more and more,
Yes.
wonderful research is coming out that's actually demonstrating this stuff. And so, it seems to me that pretty much since Uranus was discovered, I always forget the date, 1789, is that right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. Got it. that with, the Industrial Revolution and the so-called Age of Enlightenment, I mean, what a nonsense to have called it that, but that's what they thought. That there has been a tremendous kind of splitting in such a way that, and many things contributed to this, including some of the dominant religious forms and religious structures, not only Christianity, but others as well. So it was very much spiritually and religiously a push for transcendence.
Yes, yes.
And that's mirrored in the myth of progress. So literally up and out and bigger and better and away from here and going over there, elsewhere. Do you know?
One of my areas of specialty in astrology is understanding the processional cycle. And I think what you're describing is, what happened even prior to the discovery of Uranus with our movement into the patriarchal period with the age of Aries. And
Yes.
how we went from the age of Taurus, that honoring of the earth and our interconnectedness with the sacredness of all of life, to
Yes.
the sky gods and that push for transcendence.
Yes.
The devaluation of the earth and of the sacred feminine, which I think is part of what's then led us into this fragmentation and splitting and the loss of that sense of our wholeness.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, really. I mean, that provides a beautiful symbolic frame for what has obviously been happening, And then, of course, along comes Chiron, born, as it were, into our consciousness in the very sign of Taurus.
That's right.
Oh, and both Uranus and Pluto were also, no, let me say it the other way around. When Uranus and Pluto were discovered, Chiron was also in Taurus.
Wow.
Not with Neptune, but then, Neptune was actually discovered way back in the time of Galileo, but wasn't recognized as such, Yeah, I think that's such an important theme because, there's two charts that I use for the discovery of Chiron. There's the November the 18th, 1977, which is the first observation of Chiron. Or the discovery, and then the announcement of the discovery is November the 1st, 1977. And in the first one, the October one, there's an exact to the minute conjunction of Pluto with the North Node to the minute. Wow. And then in the second one, the only Earth planet, including angles here, the only Earth planet is Chiron. And it's in the fourth house. And I remember when I first saw that, I thought, oh, the message is, this is the only earth we've got.
Mm,
Chiron and Taurus.
wow,
Sounds like
beautiful.
the foundation of the wound is that. And then what you've described, also a beautiful symbolic progression to indicate that, you know.
Well, and it so is woven in with Chiron as a centaur, half human, half horse. And I love in your book on Chiron how you weave in the pre-patriarchal meanings of the horse and the sacredness of the horse, and some of how that guides us in understanding Chiron at a deeper level. But then that as a centaur, it's holding that honoring of the interconnectedness of
Exactly,
our
because
humanity with the life around us.
of course, because the centaur being the upper half as human and the lower half as the horse. Well, the wound occurs in the lower half.
Mm,
You know, that's the bit that connects with the ground. And so the human part has to live with the pain of this wounded animal which he stands on. And that's his, you know, it's the connection with the earth. Now, some centaur depictions are with an entire human body, and then the back end is horse and horse legs. And some are with a complete horse body except for the head, you know. But either way, in the mythology, the wound is in the leg. And so that's almost definitely going to be in the horse part. And so,
and often in the thigh, isn't it? Which would really tie
yes, I
in with
believe
that
there
connection to
are alternatives
Sagittarius.
with that, that say the knee or the calf. But either way you look at that, well, if we just think of the astrology, the thigh is ruled by Sagittarius, the knee by Capricorn, the calf and ankle by Aquarius. And the ruling planets are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus.
Mm,
And of course, that
wow.
is exactly, so Jupiter and Uranus are like the boundaries of Chiron's orbit, which goes through Saturn's orbit. And that to me speaks volumes, because it's as if we think of Chiron going round and round, so total cycle is about 50 years. So it goes through the orbit of Saturn and out. It doesn't cross the orbit of Uranus, but it goes right up to what's called the sphere, meaning it's just on the inside of the orbit. And that's so graphic because, you know, when we have an aha experience, when Uranus visits us, let's say, we can have these marvelous moments. It could be just a few seconds, few hours, few days, weeks, months, years, maybe lifetimes, who knows, when we get to see the big picture and we feel like, oh my God, I've got it. Now I understand it. Wow. And then we go, you know, reading, looking for other people who've been saying similar, and there's tremendous energy and things start flowing and our life lines up and so forth. But what we don't realize is that's a transpersonal
Mm,
um,
yes.
experience occurring in a realm that's out of time. And so we have to loop back to look, like pick up the threads that we dropped to see what needs to happen in order that what we've left behind or think we've understood or released, etc., it may not yet be transformed. And there we need to do the underworld work. So we're taken, boom, back into that world of Saturn. And then eventually, you know, we come out again, metaphorically. And it occurs to me that the splitting that often accompanies big Uranian transits or people who've got very Uranian horoscopes, this is a huge challenge for them, which I think is addressed in a very compassionate way by this orbit of Chiron. You know, it's like what goes round comes round, you know, that phrase. And that puts a different light onto the whole very messy business of landing after insights or understandings or big Uranian aha things. And my sense is, if that doesn't happen, the splits get wider and wider, and what starts out maybe as a conflict between two people spreads out into the family, spreads out in the neighbor, and then before we know it, there's war. And everything is then projected into blame and shame, which is, that's big these days. You know, but it starts in many cases from us not having the means or the support or the understanding or the framework to really go back and do the work of compassion, which is about attending to our own suffering. And that seems to me that that's an incredibly important art in these days, because, you know, with all the media that we're surrounded by all the time, we know now so much about unthinkable horrors of suffering that are going on all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, there was a time when that might have been going on, but hey, we might not have even known about it. We might have got distant word, you know, from a messenger who came through by horseback or carts, but nothing like what we have now. We are bombarded with this day and night. And it's not just in one or two little locales of misfortune. It's like everywhere. And so the whole art of being willing to be aware of where and how we suffer, and to learn healing modalities of how to be with that. To me, it's crucial in these times, you know.
What's so profound in what you're saying too is that in a way, being inundated with all that information about the trauma all around us can be traumatizing.
Exactly.
That if we don't do that inner work, which Chiron guides us to do, then we do get caught in projections or reactivity, or we take our own unresolved wounds and project them onto other people, and then we're acting
Exactly.
that out. But then we're just caught in that trauma
It's
cycle.
sort of snowballing.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's so profound what you're saying too, in terms of Chiron's effort to constantly help us reweave what's been broken, to reconnect what's been split off, whether it's those lost parts of ourselves or our disconnection from the earth or from each other. But it's trying to bring back that holistic connectedness again.
Yes, I think so. You know, for whatever cosmic reason, this kind of bifurcation and splitting had to happen. I don't know if it had to happen. Some people will say, yes, it did have to happen. Some will say, no, it shouldn't have happened. And me, I don't know. I haven't got a clue, but it did happen. And for whatever reason that happened, it's as if, you know, where we are now, as you say, we are in a position to understand something of we have a frame of understanding now, more and more, where it's almost like, well, to take a very mundane example, you know, if you misplace something, like maybe it's a special hat that you only wear on a special occasion, and then you're all dressed up and your car's running and you can't find the hat. And you look everywhere and you get furious and the hat is gone. Can't find it. So you've lost this really important thing. You can't find it anyway. And then maybe ages afterwards, you're still pining about this hat. And you then remember that during a renovation in the loft, maybe, the hat was put into a completely different cupboard, effectively lost. Mm-hmm. So it's still in the house, but you can't find it and you still think about it. It's a very mundane example. But it's a bit like that with parts of ourselves. You know, if we have no concept of how the psyche works, or how the other dimensions also work.
Yes. Yes.
Because, one thing that interests me a lot is how different viewpoints give different pictures, a bit like the famous story of the elephant, blind people trying to describe an elephant that they can't fully see, but they can touch. So one says, oh, this is an animal with huge, big, long teeth things that stick out the front. And then the other person says, no, this is an animal that's got a little tail that flicks around a lot. And the other one says, no, this is an animal with 4 legs like tree trunks. And of course, they're all correct, So there's something about being able to accept the reality of other dimensions that, to me, becomes very important here. Because for all the benefit of the many different psychological approaches, they are mostly, or have been mostly, individual-centered.
Yes.
And that's as it should be, and it's fabulous, and I've had loads of therapy myself, etc. But there's a way in which that can reinforce the very cultural direction of a kind of individuality that gets its individuality by competing with others, by not caring about the earth, by not having the wits, actually, to see that, one individual is not the center of the world or the universe. And yet there's a way in which, in our own spiritual core, we are that center, except that we're not the only one. And there are a lot of other centers everywhere,
Which is that understanding of quantum physics. Yeah.
Exactly right. And so, whereas it can be profoundly healing and grounding to learn about and understand patterns that come from interactions with mainly mother and father, could be siblings, members of the extended family, and so on. The human interaction level of it is only one dimension, because that very quickly takes you into ancestral patterning, where then the relationality goes between the dimensions. And effectively, that's relating with the spirit world,
Absolutely.
And so actually, it's something that's very close. And I do believe that in a general way, our minds are expanding enough to be able to really take that on. And also, there are people more and more who have, and it's not just like a rare gift, it's a skill that can be learned, how to relate to that kind of experience. Because one thing I've noticed in my practice, probably particularly since Chiron, is that the kind of worldview within which it's not only natural, but normal and desirable to be relational with the ancestors, i.e., to be in relation to the spirit world. Now, because all that's been laughed out of court and suppressed on religious grounds and poo-pooed and disrespected and all the rest of it, it's kind of gone underground a bit. But my experience has been a little bit of scratch on that surface, and boom, people are only too eager to confide and tell amazing experiences they've had that are obviously interdimensional and not just psychological projections. And there really is a difference, And people are thrilled to just somehow feel the space, to be able to just speak about that. Maybe not even a problem or something they're worrying about, but just to be able to share, well, yes, this happened, and isn't it amazing? Kind of thing,
Oh, absolutely. This is so beautiful to hear. And some of how I got into astrology was finding the limitations of traditional clinical psychology. Even though I'd explored it as far as I could take it, it's ultimately limited in so many ways. And what you're describing is how astrology can guide us to open to those other dimensions. And with Chiron, what's been extraordinary to me with people is to see not only how it helps them understand that ancestral lineage, but also their incarnational lineage and the
Yes,
way in which they're often carrying or working past life trauma in this lifetime. And it has been so freeing and healing for so many people that I've worked with to begin to
yes,
make those connections and
yes,
understand some of those experiences.
indeed. And I've often found that there is almost like there's some kind of mysterious reciprocality between those two realms, you know?
That's a good way to
And
put it.
I've often found that if people do ancestral work in through whatever way, there's quite a lot of opportunities around with different teachers to do that kind of work at the moment. And it can also just be in a very personal, organic way, like anyone who loves writing a journal. Well, journaling is an ideal way to speak with the ancestors, and there's if you're doing that work solo, there's a wonderful book just called Ancestral Medicine, which I'd highly recommend.
Yeah,
And
I
I
have a
have
dear friend
noticed that if
doing that
people
work.
do that work, it really releases a lot of energy. And then quite often people have past life recalls or become aware of something in that kind of past life domain. There seems to be some kind of echo between those two streams, you know,
That makes so
or
much
even
sense.
that the actual themes repeat or echo or mirror in some way. But I don't think they're necessarily two separate things, if you see what I mean.
That makes complete sense. And again, it feels like part of the gift with Chiron is it's trying to help us bring those things into the light of consciousness to heal and to heal ourselves, but in that way, heal our connections with
Yeah,
the ancestral realm.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, so we've been so fortunate in the last couple of decades, nearly 3 now, where tomes and tomes of wonderful old textbooks of astrology have been translated. And this is well known now, I'm sure. Translated from old languages, like ancient Greek, ancient Arabic, um, Latin, and so forth. And sometimes mostly translated for the first time by an astrologer, because some of them had already been translated, but not by astrologers, by academics who not only didn't know any astrology, but thought it was the work of the devil. So what resulted was a complete, like scrambled eggs, just didn't make any sense. And that's also marvelous. But I'm even more curious as to, okay, well, what was happening before that?
Yes.
Before the tradition that we call astrology was being written down, because it does seem, for sure, that mankind has looked to the skies for guidance maybe since the dawn of time. That's my gut sense. Now, of course, I can't prove that, but there is some way in which, in an animistic kind of world where everything is alive and everything has a spirit, an essence, if you want to call it that, well, then, you don't have to spend however many billions of dollars they spent on the first moon launch. You just go there.
Yes, exactly.
It's a lot cheaper. You just go there. And so, in that sense, I can easily imagine that looking at a night sky, which I did a lot when I was a child in Africa, obviously, but looking at a night sky and tracking the movements of planets night by night, and how they move and so on. to me, it's only a small step to feel like, wow, they're like my friends, you know, and I'm like visiting my friends every night and maybe talking with them or them coming in my dreams and so forth. In other words, it's very relational.
Oh, yes. Beautifully said.
Certainly about the visible planets, I'm quite sure that that must be how it has been. Well, there's the famous example of the Dogon
I
people.
was just thinking that. And
Snap.
Sirius A and Sirius B, yes.
Exactly right. You know?
Yes, and it is that as we were talking before the interview, that those shamanic roots that are at the base of every culture, that is that ancient wisdom that everything is interconnected and that we
Yeah.
can be in relationship with all that is. So we
Yes,
can have that level of communication and connection and
absolutely.
move between the dimensions.
Yeah. And in a way, to kind of oversimplify it, but that is the healing of the wound,
Mm,
because there's a huge cultural wound of disconnection, separation. And that we all have. And you know, the wound of separation that everybody experiences when they're born, coming out of the womb and having the cord cut. Of course, that can be mitigated big time, depending on the nature of the bonding with the mother, and then the mother's embedding in the family, the clan, the tribe, etc. And so it's almost like everything is held.
mm,
And if there's not enough of that at a birth, then it becomes also a very personal wound. But it's like a mass cultural wound at
yes.
the moment. And the way we're educated and the amount of screen time, social media, and the kind of things that we read and look at, and even the music we listen to, does nothing to soothe that wound. It's mostly almost like a scream from that place
Mm.
that we don't hear because we're also screaming in some way. It's putting it a bit dramatically, but I think I mean it.
But it's true. And do you sense that, part of my hope is that as we move into the age of Aquarius and we're in that transitional time, that it is about reweaving our connection with the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine so that we're no longer caught up in that journey of separation, individuation, and disconnection, but remembering that ancient wisdom of the sacred feminine, that we are connected with all that
Yeah,
is.
we actually are connected. That's the irony. We can't not be connected,
Exactly.
you know. I really agree with the perspective that you've just mentioned. I really do, because there's something about Aquarius being the final air sign.
Mm,
It's almost like the mind has become pretty much as expanded as it can be. And it holds the sky, it holds the big picture. And one needs that kind of space in the mind for it to be able to open up enough to go beyond the very narrow dualities and so forth. Because, when we get stuck in that, it's only a small step to somebody has to be right and somebody has to be wrong.
the dualism and polarity
Yeah,
that's
because there's
rampant
nothing
now.
wrong with polarity per se. It's just when all of these value judgments get laid on top of it, then it becomes very problematic. And so, that wide open sky view gives the space for that to open up. And I think, yes, to me, that's the hope of the sign of Aquarius. I'm also very aware that it is a fixed sign. And so the hazard in Aquarius is ideologies,
Mm,
fixed systems of ideas, you know, and how, well, they get infused with having to be right, of course, and then more othering of people, and so it goes on. And also, in order to really allow the mind to expand, I believe anyway, it's really important in Age of Aquarius terms to be able to think clearly, think rationally, think properly. Because firstly, that does open up space by being able to tell when emotions are getting mixed up with thoughts, because therein lies craziness. And there's plenty of that going on at the moment. But something about it opening up the space. I'm not sure I believe in objectivity per se in terms of human interactions, but there's enough space to like see what's going on and for the light to go on, you know, and I think that's really important.
Well,
And
with Uranus as the modern ruler of Aquarius, to me, it would circle back to what you were saying before about Uranus as the great awakener and being the higher octave of Mercury and helping us have that more expansive understanding.
Exactly. And there are numerous things about the contemporary world that don't encourage the above, in truth.
Yeah.
There's only too many ideologies and what are called canned meaning, you know, ready-made view. This is how it is. And if you want to be saved, or if you want to, whatever the bargain is, you must believe this. It's a form of brainwashing, you know.
Yeah.
And I was thinking the other day about the relationship between Aquarius and the previous two air signs. So first is Gemini, second is Libra, third is Aquarius. And if one thinks of that kind of developmentally, I find that really interesting, because it's almost like Gemini is a sign where the process of discerning polarities and seeing the opposites, and then sometimes, you know, feeling impaled on the discomfort of all that, or confounded with paradox, or confused by dilemma, or whatever. That's all part of the Gemini journey. But it is that the mind that needs to see things as separate in order to understand them better by comparing and contrasting and so forth. So there's nothing in there that says one has to be good and one has to be bad, you know. It's just, it's learning by differentiation. And then in Libra, that almost becomes something very relational. So that art of relationship, and it really is an art in Libra, and working towards equality, and so understanding difference, kind of you get going on that one in Gemini. And then the kind of themes like justice and equality come in Libra. And then, of course, realizing that there are levels and levels to those ethical and moral issues. And so it goes on. And then in Aquarius, it's almost like, ideally, there's enough to encompass the whole lot, because there's a unified field of some kind, which is sensed. And all that mental activity sort of takes place within that space. That's how I like to see Aquarius, like a wonderful, fertile space. I think of Rudyard here. He was fond of the word plenum, which means like an empty space, but which is full of potential. It's not full of stuff or objects. It's empty, but it's full of potential, you know.
Maybe like the dark energy that runs through the cosmos.
Exactly.
And connects everything. I know he had profound influence on you, on your path as an astrologer. And he has talked so much about this time as a movement into that galactic consciousness.
Absolutely.
Which I think is tied in with some of what you're talking about.
Yes, I think so. because, well, way back, astrology was geocentric, or the cosmology of the day was geocentric until the time of Copernicus. And then we had the Copernican revolution when it was discovered and established. It used to be heresy, but it was established that the sun was actually the center of the solar system and the planets went around it. And, when the centaurs were first discovered in what's called the Kuiper belt, it's a big belt of matter around the outside of the solar system that absolutely teems with objects that we've yet to discover, and loads of different categories as well, of which the centaurs is simply one. I wish I had chapter and verse on this, but I don't. But I vividly remember reading, it was in a magazine like New Scientist. I've even gone online and tried to find, back issues of all these things. I haven't come across it, but it was unforgettable because it said that the discovery of the Kuiper belt with all of its different objects, which for us, the centaurs, is a cosmological revolution of the magnitude of the Copernican revolution. In other words, it is changing our sense of the cosmos that we inhabit. I mean, that is amazing. So, I mean, even if we shrink that all the way down to, my individual life, your individual life, anybody's individual life, that's a nice metaphor for just how mind-blowing and transformative, major encounters with the centaur energies. Chiron, Pholus, Nessus, Chariklo, those are the main four I work with, that they really do bring something that really is different, and yet they're not, well, Chiron isn't, a pure outer planet like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. He straddles the two realms, and so again is the theme of connecting that you keep referring to, and so yes, the galactic perspective is that, of course, we now know that our entire solar system revolves around the galactic center,
right?
And so what we used to know as the universe is now a multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
There are loads of galaxies all over the place. It's not just ours, So it occurs to me that as long as we are still a human race living here on this planet, that our experience is fundamentally connected with the earth. It has to be, because this is where, for whatever reason, this is where we incarnated. I don't know whether we had the option to go elsewhere. I really don't know. Some people think we did. But for me, we're here. And the earth in all of its glory has a huge influence on our own experience as well. Mm. And so to me, the transformation of our experience of the earth and being here and being of the earth and connected to its cycles and its energies and its history, to me, that's an important part of being here. Because when you really begin to get a sense of that, you can't but feel connected. Because it beautiful. Is so completely mind-blowing. And there, some of the outlying research in science is so extraordinary. Like, for example, current research about funguses and bacteria and all that, be they inside the body or out in the environment. This is a brand new field, or maybe not brand new, but it wasn't coming into the public eye at all until a few years ago. And it's absolutely thrilling. And, right. This is the world that we live in.
Well, and just that understanding that mycelium connects the trees in a forest so that yes. they communicate with each other. And if one is threatened,
sounds like we've been reading the same books.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Absolutely.
But again, to me, that is the reweaving of that sacred feminine wisdom that, yes, everything is sacred and conscious, and we're connected with everything, versus that sense of separation
Yeah.
that came with the sacred
Yeah.
masculine.
Where,
So it does
human
feel like
beings
we're
are the only
reweaving
things.
that.
Sorry, I talked over you there. I
No,
got
go ahead.
overexcited. Oh, Lord. Yeah, I was just saying, as distinct from a sort of a worldview where the human being is kind of at the top of the heap, and therefore all of his addiction to progress and bigger is better and all that stuff that we know about is where it's at, and the rest is just kind of there passively to be exploited in the
Right.
interests of, it is a completely different worldview than if
You may
everything
know,
was alive and connected through the dimensions. Completely wow,
you probably are familiar with Elizabeth Satorus's work, also the evolutionary biologist,
Yes.
who says very much what you're saying, that species as they evolve move from that sense of superiority or competition, survival of the fittest, to that understanding of interconnectedness and collaboration, that's actually how we thrive. But
Yeah.
we humans have to catch up.
Yeah, we're kind of a bit backward.
So, as we're in this healing process, can you talk a little bit about where Chiron and the centaurs are now, and maybe what their messages are to us in this time?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. At the moment, so Chiron is at the moment at 614 of Aries, and in the last weekend of May, it will be up to 11 plus of Aries, which is the aphelion. So
Ah,
that means that's Chiron's furthest point away from the sun in its orbit. So after May, Chiron will be coming in towards the sun again. And I find this quite amazing, just symbolically, because, Rudolf Steiner had some very interesting things to say about comets. Now, Chiron isn't really a comet, but there was a few years around 1989 where they thought it was a comet because they thought they could see it brightening, and they thought they saw a tail or so, but that kind of fizzed out somehow. But it got a comet number. So Chiron has been called a planetoid, an asteroid, and a comet. Planetoid, asteroid, comet. Is there something else? Anyway, and now a centaur, in other words, has got its own category. But it still has all its other category numbers, which I find also quite wonderful. And somewhere, speaking of the very thing we're talking about, there's no need to get rid of and banish and disrespect that which has gone before, which is nearly always what happens. It can come along as well.
mm-hmm. And again, Chiron moves between the worlds in different definitions and categories.
Exactly, between the inner planets and the outer planets. And there's a kind of fluidity of consciousness there, So Chiron's now 614 of Aries. And the centaur called Pholus.
That's at 5 degrees of Capricorn, is that right?
Yeah, it's about that. I thought I'd printed that out, but I didn't. I'll just check that, double check. It's very close. It's only about a degree away. Yeah, 5 and 13, so almost exactly 1 degree. Now, that square is something I've been tracking that square since 2015 because I just happened to notice, because I kind of like to know what the centaurs are up to, because I feel like they're kind of like my friends, like to.
You're of the same tribe.
How's it going? What's up? And I noticed that there was going to be a long trail of 7 squares between Chiron and Pholus. And, you know, normally it's the much slower planets where you get 7, like, you know, the Uranus Pluto was 7 squares, but, you know, they're the big heavy dudes outside. And I thought, wow, that's kind of long. Of course, with the centaurs, that can happen when both of them are near their aphelion, in other words, further away from the sun, so they appear to take longer to go through their signs.
That makes sense.
So I kind of spotted this, and when I put up a graph, my eyes came out on stalks. So if you look at a list of the dates on which they were exact, the first exact square was only in 2016, or no, 2017. But if you look on one of those transit graphs, you can see that they were within orb already of square in 2015. And then in 2016, it looks like a skid. So they come on the 2 lines on the graph, they go almost to cross each other, but then they don't, but they skid along in what must have been the very same degree, but square each other for months and months. I then realized, oh my God, at the beginning of this skid, we had the Brexit referendum here to the day. And at the end of the skid, Trump was elected. So when I saw that, by the end of 2017, I was really tracking them. So I tracked all the stations, all the exact squares, and it was mind-blowing. Because now my tagline for Folus is the lid comes off.
Yes.
And I didn't make that up. This is a phrase I heard clients who I'd be doing readings for. They kept using this phrase to describe what was going on with their transits. And I saw it again and again and again, like this enormous outbreak of fast moving chaos, often which is completely unsought outable. So the best thing to do is like sit quiet and pray and stay conscious, write in your journal, etc., until it's all died down. Because often, if you really look at it, it's stuff you can't do anything about. And so I came to call it the ancestral flood tide. So now, if you see it that way and you have that feel for it, amazing the insights and the healing that can come through just by recognizing stories of the ancestors wound into all this chaos, or picking up the trail, or just staying alert for clues.
Or maybe also our cultural trauma coming into consciousness.
Exactly, you got it. You got it. So it's Chiron in Capricorn. Yeah. And so that is that which has already been established. It is history. It is the structures of the government and, you know, all of this kind of thing. So I remember looking at that and thinking, oh, wow, we've not only got Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, we've got Folus, and we are in for a ride. That's what I thought. So I can't call it all to mind right now, and it's not necessary anyway. But in those few years, of course, we had the Me Too movement. Lid came off. Huge thing in terms of lid coming off different racial themes that have been either buried or simmering all over, you know. And so then we had the trials and tribulations, literally, of Harvey Weinstein. We had the movie, which was the biggest expose of Michael Jackson. All of these, bing, 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 all along that Chiron Folus.
Amazing.
I then remember looking that the last 2 of the squares, that they didn't even move 1 degree out of orb. So there was a couple of months, about 4 months, when they were within 1 degree orb of the square the whole time. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Wonder what will have happened by then. So the final one was March the 8th last year. By which time
I was waiting for that. I assumed that it must be tied in. Amazing.
By which time the whole world was either already in lockdown or arguing about whether they were going to do it, and if so, how, and all the rest of it. And everybody was in shock. The one just before that, now I haven't checked this date recently, but that was I believe it was the 8th of December, 8th or the 12th of December. And when I first looked that up, that was the date on which the first officially labeled coronavirus infection was logged in Wuhan. And I remember seeing that, because already there was mumbling about, a bit of an outbreak of flu, in Wuhan. And I remember seeing that, it's lined up with Pholus. And within a week, I thought, this is going to be a pandemic, And then March the 8th, it's like, wow. So I've been tracking it all the time, when either one of them is opposite the sun or conjunct the sun, or when they're on their station. And just this cascade of events that totally fit the symbolism, even down to, get this. So with Pholus, there is this specific reference in the mythology to 4 generations. So Pholus was the custodian of the sacred jar of wine of Dionysus. And versions vary with this, but it came with conditions attached. And one was that it shouldn't be opened for 4 generations. So 4 generations, if you use derived houses, takes you once around the horoscope. And in many traditions, 4 generations of the ancestors are known, named, their stories are told. Maybe they even have a little shrine in the house. This is still today in some countries. But after 4 generations, it's like they become the generic ancestors, the collective of the tribe or the family and so on. So one day I thought, and I'd seen this in my own family tree and with clients, and it was just amazing. In a literal, I thought it can't be that literal, but it is often. So then I thought, I wonder about Pholus and his 4 generations. So I look back. I discovered his father was Silenus, who was also a hybrid creature, but had a donkey's ears and tail, said to have maybe been the prototype for Shakespeare's Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Amazing.
Yeah. So he was only the son of Pan, who was only one of the sons of Hermes. Now, Silenus was the storyteller of the gods, okay? And in Apollodorus, I believe it is, there's a beautiful description of him and how engaging he was as a storyteller. And the way it's written, it's put very tongue-in-cheek and very tenderly, actually, basically saying that he wasn't above being fast and loose with the truth for the sake of a good story. So I read that, I thought, this is the age of fake news. Everybody's being fast and loose with the truth, to the point we don't even know what it is anymore, right? And some of it is very engaging, dangerously so. I mean, who knows? This has to be a feature of these times. And I thought, hey, well, look, this is Chiron and Pholus. What do you expect? Kind of thing.
That is extraordinary.
Unbelievable.
How it ties in with all of the,
so like, Pholus,
but again, bringing it to consciousness for healing.
Son of Silenus, son of Pan, as in pandemic, right?
Wow. And how the pandemic has helped us realize our separation from the earth and our need.
And also with many people, it's given them the space to come back to themselves a little bit, and to maybe pay more attention to just really basic things like what we eat, our rhythms of resting and being active, and so forth, and how important are our tribes and clans. And this includes the non-blood clan. To me, that's very much the soul of Aquarius, is these miraculous little groupings of people that have such a profound sense of familiarity in the circuit, yeah? And you may never have seen the person before. And in some cases, you may never see them again. But you are drawn together, you come together, etc., with like a shared vibe about some things, and to discuss in an open way where it can be explorative. Nobody has to be right or wrong. So one's soul tribes, be they one or be they many, just incredibly precious, especially, you know, with the lockdown and some of the intense isolation that people have been experiencing. So from one point of view, spiritually, for some people, that's been an opportunity to really connect much more deeply inwardly. And for others, it's been an opportunity to have the time to really feel how important are one's human connections, including family connections and so forth. And then the chance to participate in cyber tribes of all kinds, you know. To me, that's very Aquarius.
Oh, beautifully said. That's a great note to end on, because what you're describing is how in that process then we take that time to turn inward and work what we need to heal in ourselves, but then it does support us in how we can come back into connection with each other in more healing ways. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Well, any last thoughts you'd like to share before our time ends?
I don't think so, actually. But just, I have to say, it's been so fabulous just chatting with you, really. I'm sure we could probably go on for hours like this.
I agree, but it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you,
the
Heather.
time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.